The US is pushing Mexico to get tougher on its southern border, with dangerous consequences.
The U.S. pushed Mexico to do its dirty job of keeping people from reaching our border and trying to request protection here.
There's been a lot of focus on the Trump administration's immigration policy.
The Trump administration has been lying about this policy and downplaying the deliberate child abuse.
At its capacity, this place could house up to 4,000 children.
And if children get caught up in the fallout of that, according to the Attorney General, so be it.
And despite President Trump's claims,
they flow right through Mexico, they send them into the United States.
Mexico actually deports more Central American people than the US does, and has done so since 2015.
The fact that there was a lot of pressure on Mexico to do something that they probably weren't equipped to do really is concerning in terms of what this has meant for a very vulnerable population of Central American migrants, mostly, who have been fleeing their homes seeking protection in the past few years.
En el país se ha vivido un deterioro grave de todos los sistemas, digamos, de protección, de seguridad humana, y eso está afectando a todas las personas que vivimos en el país y especialmente a personas sometidas todavía a mayor vulnerabilidad por no tener documentos, como es el caso de muchas personas migrantes.
Hi guys, I'm Daniel, and this Sunday we're going to be talking about the other Mexican border and how the US is supporting Mexico's efforts to control migration from Central America.
La realidad, pues a mí me secuestraron, me quisieron, ¿cómo se llama?, matar. Bendito Dios, pues por eso yo salí de mi país.
En mi país ahorita se las han tomado las maras, perdí a mi esposo y mi decisión fue venirme a México.
El problema es de que no quiero que mi familia pues, vaya a crecer en un lugar de delincuencia como yo crecí, ¿me entendés? Y pues al menos no me quise meter en nada de eso porque pues la vida de mis hijos son los primeros. Pues.
Those are just a few of the reasons people along Mexico's border with Guatemala told us why they decided to leave home. However, most refugees and migrants will never make it to the US border. That's because starting in 2014, there was a dramatic jump in the number of them arrested in Mexico. To understand why there's been this increase in arrests, we need to talk about Programa Frontera Sur, or as it's known in English, the Southern Border Plan. Frontera Sur is the Mexican government's program to step up immigration enforcement, particularly in southern Mexico.
Para que realmente tengamos una frontera sur mucho más segura, ordenada.
It was announced in July 2014 by Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto after tens of thousands of children fleeing violence arrived at the US border. President Obama declared it a humanitarian crisis.
And earlier this week, Mexico announced a series of steps that they're going to take on their southern border to help stem the tide of these unaccompanied children.
Obama, by the way, has been called deporter-in-chief by undocumented immigrant advocacy groups. Maureen Meyer at WOLA, the Washington Office on Latin America, says that while Mexico was already arresting Central American refugees and migrants prior to Frontera Sur, this was significant because it was a conscious decision by Mexico to work more closely with the US.
Lots of phone calls were made and requests made from the United States to Mexico saying, you need to help us address Central American migration, and really pressuring Mexico to step up enforcement as a way to reduce the number of Central Americans reaching the US border.
Initially, Peña Nieto said that part of Frontera Sur would promote and protect migrant rights.
El programa Frontera Sur tiene un doble propósito. Uno, proteger y salvaguardar los derechos humanos de los migrantes que ingresan y transitan por México.
I think if that was the aim, it's failed miserably. If the objective was more to detain and deport Central American and others, then they've had a lot of success.
A quick look at the nature of US involvement might give you an idea of what's shaped the policies of Frontera Sur. WOLA says that since 2014, there's probably been $200 million allocated to Mexico for southern border security.
Now what this looks like on the ground is funding for setting up communications towers along the border that enable Mexico's security agencies and the immigration agency to better communicate, to improved biometric equipment for Mexico's immigration agency so you know who's going through your detention centers and the ports of entry.
WOLA even found that ICE, or the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, maintains a presence at a detention center in Tapachula, Mexico that houses children. Besides sending those fleeing violence back into potentially dangerous situations in their home countries, Frontera Sur may actually be putting them more at risk on their journey. Just listen to some of their stories.
Pues no es seguro, Jesse. La verdad nunca es seguro. Nunca te esperas lo que te puedes encontrar en el camino, como hay policías malos, hay policías buenos también que te ayudan.
Los asaltaron, los sacaron grandes machetes y los quitaron todo lo que llevábamos. Y los quitaron la ropa, el teléfono y ya quedamos sin nada y tuvimos que regresarlos para atrás.
Acaban de agarrar vergazo ahí en la frontera. Me querían robar mi mochila y me robaron 200 pesos y me abrieron la cabeza de un garrotazo y me golpearon, mi cuerpo lleno de sangre.
The crackdown has pushed travelers into more remote, more dangerous parts of the country, a country that's getting more unsafe for everybody. Mexico's population is a little over 1/3 of the United States, and in 2017, there was a record 29,000 homicides in Mexico, the highest number since the country's modern record-keeping began. That means in Mexico, for every 100,000 people, more than 20 of them were murdered. In the US, that number was closer to just 5, meaning Mexico's murder rate is nearly 4 times higher. Crimes and abuses against people traveling through Mexico continue at an alarming rate. And according to WOLA, shelters have noted a more intense degree of violence in the reported cases. And there have been reports of alleged verbal and physical abuse by Mexican officials, even using taser guns to threaten and control them.
Migrants are frequently kidnapped, extorted, robbed. Often women are sexually assaulted, both by criminal organizations, but sometimes in collusion with Mexican officials. And we have not seen any significant effort by Mexican authorities to curtail those abuses.
The U.S. may have played a larger role in making Mexico more dangerous. Diego Lorente says the policy of dealing with migration as an issue of national security actually goes pretty far back.
Las políticas del Estado mexicano siempre han sido, desde hace mucho tiempo, principios de los años 2000, incluso los 90, se traduce, digamos, en una política de control, de represión, de detención, de deportación y de negación de derechos básicos a las personas migrantes.
This focus on security began after the 9/11 attacks, when former Mexican President Vicente Fox and then U.S. President George W. Bush decided to cooperate more closely on matters of national security. Mexico established Plan South, a system of police and military surveillance. It also started deferring to the U.S. on issues relating to the southern border. Then in 2007 came the Mérida Initiative. The U.S. signed on to support the purchase of military equipment and training as part of Mexico's newly declared war on drugs. Under Mérida, the U.S. has allocated over $2 billion in aid to Mexico in the past decade, and $100 million of that has gone to Mexico's National Institute of Migration since 2014. Mérida is highly controversial. Critics say it has only made the situation worse. The strategy coincided with the militarization of public security in Mexico, in part stemming from an enormous increase in firearm sales from the US. WOLA and human rights organizations have even gone so far as to call on the US to withhold aid from Mexico because they're concerned about the human rights situation.
It's a very dangerous situation where Mexico's in right now because you have military enrolls that don't correspond to them, and a lot of times leads to abuses against the civilian population or others that they encounter with very weak accountability mechanisms, so really weak efforts to investigate any soldier involved in crimes or human rights violations against their population.
And there's another way the US has contributed to the crisis. Many of the reasons Central Americans are fleeing their home countries stem from decades of US intervention. Take, for example, the wars in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua in the 1980s. The US spent billions funding the wars in an effort to stop the spread of communism, and the effects are still felt today. Gangs like MS-13 were made in the USA. They were actually started by Central Americans who fled US-sponsored civil wars in the 1980s. In the 90s, President Bill Clinton's policy made it easier for people to be deported, which sent these gangs back to Central America. Today, countries like El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras are among the most violent in the world.
Es que estas políticas, además de ser el patio trasero de Estados Unidos, no tienen ninguna efectividad. O sea, las personas que deportamos acá, al día siguiente están aquí otra vez. Si desde luego el interés es parar la migración hacia Estados Unidos, yo creo que no se está logrando. Lo que se está logrando es hacerle la vida imposible y violar los derechos humanos de las personas varias veces, sometiéndoles varias veces a un camino lleno de riesgos.
I'm actually Salvadoran American, and my family fled the war in El Salvador in the 1980s. What other stories about Central America should we cover? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.